Greetings, it is Bargain Bin Thor, also known as Nature's Temper or Scott, which I actually prefer and is my real name. But I'm here to promote the book series that I will be narrating into the future until I've done them all. Primitive War. It's about dinosaurs, soldiers, and death, blood, and cool stuff. If you like dinosaurs, blood, death, and cool stuff, then I highly recommend the Audible series that I will be putting the first one out very soon, or it should be actually when this video goes out. Regardless, check it out. I've actually been a fan of this series for a while. This is not a paid promotion, by the way. I've been a fan of this series for a while, before I even got contacted by the author Ethan Pettis, who reached out to me and said he wanted me to carry on the narrations of the Primitive War series. The first book has already been narrated by someone else, but I will be narrating everything except that. So, the first one that I have narrated takes place between Primitive War 1 and Primitive War 2. This is Primitive War Dispatches Volume 1, completed, and this will be available on Audible, and the link should be in the description below. But before I drag on any further, please enjoy this chapter selected for your pleasure. Hope you enjoy. Yes, you enjoy. Okay, good. Good night.
A tremendous thunderstorm thrashed through the valley like a runaway bull, shearing apart the treetops that draped the mountain walls. Xavier Wise and Andre Wynn were each thankful for the shelter the elder kapok trees provided from the full force of the biting rain. The rest of their team, the first members of Stalker Force, was gathered around the pair with their rifles fixed on the shifting rain-swept surroundings. Nightfall had struck with the force of a monsoon, and their hunting quarry was most adept when man's senses failed. It had been over a year since the men of Vulture Squad first set foot in the infamous valley festering with dinosaurs. After the surviving members of Vulture Squad parted ways, Xavier Wise had been assigned by General Jericho to personally track the dinosaurs of the valley with the assistance of Dr. Wynn. Xavier had been given free rein to select the best men possible for the job, regardless of service branch or prior expertise. Xavier knew his mission was one that required men that were capable of thinking outside of the box that military training often caged the minds of men within. He wanted men that were more than just special forces or bloodthirsty. Xavier wanted warriors, hunters, and battle-tested survivors. His search had taken him across all echelons of American military, but his efforts had been well rewarded. The first person that Xavier had recruited into Stalker Force was Sid Kinane, an M60 operator and Xavier's second in command. He was a mountain of a man, a colossus with the build of a silverback and an alpha ego to match. Xavier had first met Sid Kinane during an operation with Vulture Squad, when they had retrieved Sid and several of his platoon mates from a Viet Cong internment camp. When Xavier first met Sid, the burly Goliath had been half of his current weight, and nearly feral from a year spent in a holding pen no bigger than a dog kennel. Sid's indomitable spirit and endless defiance had made him into a prime pincushion for the Viet Cong interrogators. At the time of his liberation, Sid had told Xavier that he and his squadmates were Army Rangers caught during a routine patrol. The truth of Sid's past had been washed away by black ink. His involvements with Tiger Force remained in the shadows like so many other military disasters. Sid sauntered through the storm beside Xavier, the M60 heavy machine gun hanging like an axe in his thick-knuckled grip. His arms were as thick as the boughs of a ficus, the sleeves of his jacket torn away to expose stick-and-poke tattoos bestowed by old friends from Los Angeles. A blonde handlebar mustache hung limply from his permanent scowl. The locks of golden hair that spilled out from under his helmet were worthy of Samson and Delilah's adoration. James Molnar, the close-quarters specialist, walked close behind Sid. Molnar was a stout, stocky man with a sparkling bold dome. His eyes always seemed to be narrowed in a lecherous leer, barely emerging from above his sharply curved and bent nose. The Remington shotgun that he carried was covered in white lettering from more languages than Xavier or Andre could dream to decipher. They were mantras from around the world, pulled from texts like the Bardo Thodol and the Lesser Key of Solomon. Xavier had met Molnar during an R&R break in Saigon. They had ordered drinks at the same time in a decrepit bar within the city's greasy heart of alleyways and incense-choked brothels. Xavier had recognized the book in Molnar's hand, Hell's Angels, by Hunter S. Thompson, and the pair immediately connected over a night of gonzo reminiscing. When Xavier later discovered Molnar was an accomplished martial artist and former parajumper, he seized the opportunity and brought the renegade pseudo-psychonaut into Stalker Force. Connor Young, the medic of Stalker Force, was walking beside Andre Wynn. He was a descendant of Japanese immigrants, a first-generation American raised in an internment camp outside of Tool Lake. Connor had originally served with Xavier in the Green Beret before Xavier had been selected for Vulture Squad. Connor had been something of an apprentice to Xavier, and his cool demeanor reminded Xavier of the calm he once felt within himself before he had discovered the presence of modern-day dinosaurs. Dinosaur-related injuries required a cool head like Connor Young. The rest of Stalker Force, the sniper-spotter duo, trailed behind the team through the drenched undergrowth. Michael Waters and Craig Jacobs were an unsightly pair. Michael was a stocky, young African-American man, whereas Craig was a rotund, bearded 30-year-old. Craig and Michael had assisted Xavier and Andre during the first recon to the valley before Stalker Force had even been conceived of. Michael Waters had been raised in a small town on the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio. His upbringing had been meager, and his adolescence had been a gauntlet through relentless street fights and crackhead robberies. Michael's inherent ability to remain unperturbed to bullet slinging by his scalp had been fostered throughout his high school years. The peace he found within the concrete fields of violence had allowed him to become one of the greatest snipers the Army had ever acquired. Craig Jacobs, however, was a well-read and highly perceptive former Green Beret. After half a decade spent in the brush, he no longer felt the familiar fangs of paranoia most troops were crippled by. Craig's fears were exercised through the endless letters he wrote to his wife and their newborn son. He was the oldest member of Stalker Force, and he looked the part. Craig's skin had been sketched upon by bayonets, bullets, daggers, and the teeth and talons of the jungles he had found himself within with the Green Beret. Xavier suppressed a grin as the men of Stalker Force walked in formation around himself and Andre, with Sid on point, Connor and Molnar guarding their flanks, Michael and Craig watching their backs. The team was complete and in synchronicity. During a previous excursion into the valley, Xavier and Andre had finally tracked down the nesting site of Sobek Colony. The Utah Raptors were the true apex predators of the valley. Humans were little more than intelligent prey to the cunning dromaeosaurids. At almost 10 feet tall, 20 feet long, and a metric ton in weight, the Utah Raptors were rarely challenged by other carnivorous megafauna in the valley. Xavier and Andre had witnessed the Utah Raptors going talon for talon with even the Quetzalcoatlus and the father T-Rex, the largest predator presently walking the earth. With so little natural competition to prevent the spread of the Utah Raptor population, it was up to Stalker Force to track and kill the stealthy dromaeosaurids. So far, Xavier and Andre's early excursions into the valley had revealed startlingly little evidence of the Utah Raptors. General Jericho kept hammering the mission statement into their skulls via the radio. Find and kill the Utah Raptors. They should all be destroyed. Xavier and Andre's first expedition without Stalker Force had amounted to the discovery of 3 Utah raptor nesting sites, 2 small family-sized nests on the south end of the valley, nestled within the opposing mountain walls, as well as a 3rd nest in the deepest basin at the northern end. With little to show for the 2 southern nesting sites, Xavier rallied Stalker Force to track the passage of the Utah raptors from the abandoned northern nesting site, known as Nest Site A. While Xavier and Stalker Force were searching for their quarry through the jungle, the Army Corps of Engineers were busy repairing the concrete perimeter that penned in the less cunning inhabitants of the valley. It was of the utmost importance for Xavier and Stalker Force to find the remaining Utah raptors before they could wreak further havoc on the construction crews. There were too many men vanishing in the night, too many bloody trails leading further into the depths of the jungle. Xavier had spent months preparing for this moment. The passage of Stalker Force was disguised audibly by the relentless onslaught of rain crashing against the upper canopy. Xavier understood that if he could scarcely see or hear, that meant the Utah raptors, as well as the other carnivores in the valley, were at the advantage. He had made the decision to follow the Utah raptor tracks for another 100 meters, or until they were no longer distinguishable from the layers of rotting leaf litter. Xavier led Stalker Force through the jungle and into a grove of bamboo. There was scarcely any undergrowth beneath the countless columns of green vertebrae. As Xavier made his way downhill, he caught sight of a lone clearing at the bottom of the basin. In a brief glare of lightning, a gargantuan theropod was revealed slumbering in the center of a 40-foot wide nest. The light was vanquished as quickly as it had appeared, and the details of the sleeping dinosaur were lost to the shadows. Xavier raised a fist for the others to see, a sign to stop. The men of Stalker Force crouched beneath the pillars of bamboo as Xavier unfolded a map on the soggy carpet of leaf litter. Andre leaned over Xavier's shoulder and shined a penlight onto the heavily creased laminated parchment. Obese water droplets burst against the topographical lines denoting the features of the valley. Xavier traced Stalker Force's journey across the landscape with his index finger, smearing the raindrops towards the nest of the Tyrannosaurus family. "I think we've been tricked by the birds," Xavier mumbled. Andre groaned. "What a shock." Andre was interrupted by a bolt of lightning that tore the black skies above the bamboo asunder. The gargantuan body of the sleeping Mother T-Rex briefly glimmered in the dazzling light. Rust-brown leather skin glittered in the flickering strobe, and the Tyrannosaur's robust chest swelled with a mighty yawn. Rain cascaded over the lumpy ridge of bone above the mother's snout. If the mother was sleeping with her chicks, that meant the father was somewhere nearby, potentially on the hunt. "That's a fucking Rex," Michael, the sniper, whispered. "It's real." "Of course it's real," Andre said, shooting a dirty look over his shoulder. "Why do you think we're here?" "To find a raptor nest." Craig, Michael's spotter, muttered. "Not a Rex." "What should we do?" Connor, the medic, asked. Xavier stared at the mother T-Rex. His eyes ran circles around the sleeping theropod's curled, shadow-swathed body. Even though she was at the bottom of a hill and sleeping alone in an expansive clearing, the female tyrannosaur appeared to be large enough to move mountains. Xavier faintly wished the mother's sole infant wouldn't wake up, but more so than that, he hoped that the father wouldn't return home so soon. The storm made Xavier think otherwise. "Alright, guys, we need to turn around and head back the way we came," Xavier said to the rest of Stalker Force. Luckily, the rain and wind concealed his voice from the sleeping mother T-Rex. "If we head back to Nest Site A, we can call Ricardo for our evac and set up a perimeter. Since the Utah raptors abandoned the nest, I doubt any other predators will be coming back to it." The men agreed to Xavier's plan, nodding in silence. The storm filled the silence for Stalker Force. They half-jogged, half-sprinted through the ivy-tangled bamboo rods. The rain crawled over their bodies, soaking through their uniforms to the skin with an icy bite. Xavier and Andre remained in the center of the group as they ran. Andre kept his head low, fervently examining the shining silhouettes of the forest. Xavier held his encroaching panic at bay, using the adrenaline it provided as fuel for his tired legs. A spear of electricity sliced through the sky above the canopy, illuminating the bulging, leprous thunderclouds. White light snapped through the creases in the treetops. Xavier jerked his head up, a reaction to the scream of lightning, and caught a glimpse of a silhouetted theropod at the top of the hill they were climbing. The towering bipedal dinosaur was draped in robes of darkness, quill-like pre-feathers forming a mane around his throat and scalp. The father T-Rex was returning to his nest. Xavier saw the silhouetted Goliath looming overhead and immediately dropped to the forest floor. The rest of the team, in a show of instinctual pack mentality, dropped down beside him a second later. Andre, however, stumbled forward and spilled over Connor Young. The luminescent flare of lightning was vanquished by the concussive crash of colliding thunderclouds. The forest rolled around the men, frenzied shadows shifting through the rain-lashed understory. The shape of the father T-Rex was lost in the abysmal dark of the bamboo forest. Only the Tyrannosaur's eyes remained visible, neon black orbs crackling with moonlight and mounting rage. Xavier could already hear the father T-Rex making its way down the sloping hillside, crushing saturated bamboo reeds to paste beneath its splayed feet. Xavier chewed on his lip, counting the seconds until the father T-Rex would cross his path. He listened to the bamboo clatter and sway, the percussion of the storm playing through the shifting canopy. He didn't think the Tyrannosaurus could see or hear the men in the dark, but if its olfactory senses were as keen as Andre had previously proposed, the men were going to be a quick and easy meal for the apex predator. The ground shuddered beneath Xavier's fingertips. Xavier's eyes climbed from the earth to the sky as the father T-Rex's foul musk washed over his prone body. A deep chill cut through Xavier's core. His knees were trembling against the forest floor, churning deeper into the decaying leaves and mud. The rest of the men surrounding Xavier and Andre were hunched over, cowering in the darkness. They were painfully exposed in the sparse undergrowth. Sid, Xavier's second-in-command, had one hand on his M60, and the other digging into the malleable turf. He planted his boots into the soil, arching his spine for a quick sprint. Xavier locked eyes with him and nodded. Sid accepted the cue and lunged forward, darting past the father T-Rex whilst the theropod was distracted by the biting rain and rustling canopy. Xavier raised his head to watch Sid's silhouette vanish amongst the bamboo. A fat globule of saliva, thick as crude oil, slapped the crown of Xavier's scalp. He immediately flinched, but otherwise maintained his icy composure. When he dared to look up, he found himself staring into the father T-Rex's freshly molted throat wattle. The flesh that hung from the Tyrannosaur's barren throat bulged and writhed like tumors cloaked in scrotal skin. Fresh-grown pin feathers covered the father T-Rex's entire body like bone-white porcupine quills. Xavier and Andre both understood that molting meant the father T-Rex, like other birds, had just been through a breeding season. Xavier understood that most large animals experienced a kind of rut during mating season, a state of hormonal rage. A male Tyrannosaurus in the throes of a rut, or in must like an elephant, would be an unstoppable engine of destruction. More so than usual, Xavier thought. Thinking fast, Xavier used a series of hand gestures to direct Molnar, the CQB specialist, to move around the right flank of the T-Rex, and for Craig and Michael to move left. The three men crawled prone through the saturated leaf litter, around the father T-Rex's taloned feet, and into the darkness beyond the tip of its tail. Only Xavier, Connor, and Andre remained beneath the father T-Rex's slowly chugging chest. The father T-Rex had lost Stalker force in the rain. Xavier was attempting osmosis with the forest floor, sinking deeper into the festering soil as the father T-Rex's snout bobbed through the air a meter above his pack. The Tyrannosaurus opened its jaws, revealing a maw of chipped and bloodied fangs that framed a throbbing gullet. The father T-Rex's fat, forked tongue heaved from between its jaws and flapped through the rain around Xavier's face. Xavier bit down on his lip, clenching his eyes shut as the Tyrannosaurus's fetid jaws drew closer. The tongue brushed sickly warm spit along Xavier's cheeks, probing for soft flesh. A flare was popped from several dozen meters behind the father T-Rex. The Tyrannosaur grunted in surprise at the sudden hiss of spitting sparks and turned to face its new territorial adversary. Vermilion light, hazy with smoke, burned forth through the dark space between the silhouetted beams of bamboo. While the father T-Rex was distracted by the flare, cocking his bulbous, quill-coated skull, Xavier slapped Connor on the back and directed him away from the Tyrannosaur. Connor dragged Andre out from under the father T-Rex, and the two men hustled off to the rest of the team. Xavier was left alone beneath the disgruntled tyrant. Xavier could recognize the distinction between the rustling of vegetation and the movement of Stalker force. The rest of Stalker force was crawling away from the flare, back to Xavier. Xavier pleaded with his medulla oblongata for action. He had to move, or else the father T-Rex would find him and the others. The loss of prior members of Vulture Squad still haunted Xavier's subconscious, and his mind had been plagued by their screams for a year of anguished mental isolation. Xavier refused to lose his new squad mates, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Xavier studied the quills quivering across the father T-Rex's throat. T-Rexes mated for life. The father would understand loss. Xavier leapt to his feet and pivoted away from the father T-Rex, sprinting towards its nest. The father T-Rex turned from the flare and bellowed at Xavier's backside, causing him to stumble. Xavier found his footing as the father T-Rex's feet pounded downhill towards him. Xavier was flailing through the bamboo, shouldering past the hardened swaying pillars, his hands slipping as they brushed past slick fiber. He was blind in the rain, the father T-Rex's panting breaths filling his mental void. His sense of urgency was immense. He only hoped the other men of Stalker Force weren't foolish enough to follow him. Moonlight ebbed through a break in the canopy. A contraction of lightning above revealed the slumbering mother T-Rex in the center of the basin below. Xavier hit a hard left as the splash of light was relinquished and the father T-Rex stampeded past. Xavier held his breath. He was upwind of the father T-Rex. The aggravated carnivore barreled down the slope and slowed to a trot as he approached his mate and their sole infant. The mother T-Rex was already rousing from her slumber, groaning as she blinked groggily at the enraged father. The rest of Stalker Force crawled to Xavier and settled on their haunches around him. Xavier was still staring wide-eyed into the darkness, where only the eyes of the Tyrannosaurus were visible. Spectral lights bobbing and drifting through the glistening black rainfall. Stalker Force was silent as they listened to the theropods chortle and whinny through their prickly throat sacs. It took a nudge from Andre for Xavier to realize he was surrounded. "Good thinking," Andre muttered. "Maybe a little heads up next time. Da?" "Tyrannosaurus made for life," Xavier mumbled from the bottom of his throat. All he had to do was remind him what was important, protecting his brood. "Clever," Andre said. "Like Sobek." Xavier frowned, fixing his lips in thought as the Tyrannosaurus roared. "We'll need to figure that one out," Xavier said. "But first, We need an evac. Where are you thinking, boss? Sid asked. This side, eh? No, Xavier said, shaking his head. There could be another ambush waiting for us, for all we know. We need to call an evac from the biggest clearing this section of the valley. Andre stared at Xavier, the thunderclouds clapping approvingly. No, Andre said, shaking his head. We said we'd never go back there. Where? Molnar asked. We're in a valley of dinosaurs. What difference does any other place make? Andre sighed and wiped the rain from his glasses. He couldn't clear out the condensation, so he grunted and gave up, tossing his hands up in defeat. The ashtray, Andre stated. The Russian compound.
Greetings!